U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has landed in Beijing this afternoon for a 4-day visit to China. Janet Yellen is slated to meet with senior Chinese officials on a broad range of issues, including U.S. concerns about a new Chinese counter-espionage law. Yellen's 4-day visit to Beijing is expected to focus on recalibrating ties between the world's two largest economies locked in a confrontation. Yellen's long-anticipated trip comes weeks after a visit by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who agreed with Chinese President Xi Jinping that the mutual rivalry should not veer into conflict amid a freeze in talks between their militaries. Now, both visits are seen as critical to improving communication after the U.S. military shot down a Chinese balloon over the United States. But how is Janet Yellen expected to build on that visit made earlier by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is something we'll have to watch out for. Of course, the U.S. President, as we all know, had lauded Antony Blinken's visit. At the same time, the Republicans within the U.S. in fact questioned that visit. They said that nothing concrete had emerged out of it. Nonetheless, what the Secretary of State Antony Blinken could tom-tom about was the fact that he did manage to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping. It did seem like an ice-breaking visit, but why is Janet Yellen's visit so crucial is important to understand, because remember, it is the economies that are primarily fighting, whether it is China or the United States. Both are locking horns primarily in terms of economy. There have been sanctions during the Trump government as well, and now how Joe Biden's governance or the administration manages to have them veer or navigate the sanctions that had been slapped during Trump administration is also something that Janet Yellen will have to navigate, and what this will mean for the Biden administration in a very critical, pivotal year. As we all know, the US is expected to go to election in the year 2024. Much rests upon these few visits that are taking place between the United States and China. At the same time, important to highlight that the relations between US and China have not been doing too well. Both visits, as far as Janet Yellen and Antony Blinken's visits are concerned, are being seen as improving communication after the US military shot down this Chinese balloon over the United States. But when we look at economically, the ties are going to be further constrained, because last week, remember, the Chinese government in fact came up with a very critical law that is going to protect China's foreign policy and will make Chinese economy more skeptical. And for that, I'm joined in by Edward P. Joseph of the Johns Hopkins Institute. He's a senior foreign policy analyst. Many thanks to you, Edward. Good to have you here finally. Clearly, this visit will be Yellen's most challenging test of economic diplomacy as the U.S. Treasury Secretary, that too at a time of great distrust between both the countries. What will be the tasks at hand for Janet Yellen?
Well, Janet Yellen is going to try to put economics forefront in the relationship over national security concerns. That's the essence of her role. That's the essential goal of her mission, which she has a difficult mission. She's going to try to work and even persuade the Chinese that while the U.S. is going to take some significant measures, and the Biden administration has indicated that it will follow through with, for example, continued restrictions, advanced restrictions on semiconductors and other steps concerning China, Janet Yellen will try to say, look, this is not about some effort to contain you economically. This is not some kind of effort to wage economic warfare against you. If she will try to say that these are about specific concerns, that these are national security concerns, she will not back away from the national security concerns. And I should point out here, nor did she in her speech at my university, Johns Hopkins University, SAIS, the School of Advanced International Studies, when back in April, when Secretary Yellen gave this major policy speech on China. And she emphasized that while there are these significant differences, the U.S. does not seek to use the national security concerns as a way of getting economic advantage. So she will be looking she'll be conveying that message and be looking for ways to convey and even to propose areas where there can be steps of mutual interest
Right.
on economic matters. Please.
Edward, having said that, the Chinese are very aware of the US election cycle. What would the Chinese like to get back to a place where they see at least parts of their economic relationship with the United States being restored, rather than a zero-sum game that seemed to be quite the trajectory during the time of Donald Trump?
I think that, yes, you're absolutely right to point out the fact that there is an election. Next year will be an election year, and that even as we speak, as first Secretary of State Antony Blinken and now Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen visit China, they are under tremendous scrutiny by President Biden's opponents in the Congress, in the Republican-held House of Representatives, and of course, among those Republican candidates to replace President Biden and the ones who are vying to become president. So yes, there's tremendous scrutiny. At the same time, I think President Biden is under no illusions, nor is Secretary Yellen, about Chinese intentions. There's absolute clarity in Washington across the political spectrum. This includes Democrats and Republicans about the threat that
Right.
China represents. There's also, we should put in context here, there's great disappointment, particularly among Democrats, also some Republicans who realized that the United States was at the vanguard of getting access for China to the World Trade Organization under the understanding that China, by doing this, China would play by the rules and reciprocate fully,
Right.
allowing US and European and other companies access to their markets and also to abide by rules. But the US, of course, and its EU partners have seen none of that. China's taken advantage of its presence in WTO, but also continued on a downward track, aggressive track, for example, in piracy and not respecting intellectual property.
All right.
So this is the backdrop. This is pretty much a consensus in Washington. It's not Republicans alone. President Biden is aware of it. At the same time, he does not want to open an economic war with China. And again, that will be Janet Yellen's primary mission to convey that and to explore areas where the two countries can cooperate. Please.
I'm sure we'll learn of how the visit went after 4 days.